theyeshiva.net.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. There's one source sheet. It's one-sided. It should be enough for everybody. If not, look with somebody else, but they made a lot of copies. Okay, we're ready to begin?
Somebody's getting this. Anyone did not receive a sheet, please raise your hand. I have a first sheet here. Here, I'm going to come around to you.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, let's put down the rest. This is what. Put down the rest on a chair. Whoever wants will come take. It's fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to be using a worksheet today. So if you want to follow the text inside, that's up to you. There are copies on the first chair to my right, and you could get a source sheet. If not, it's also fine. Make yourselves comfortable. There are more chairs, I think, right?
There's chairs in the front.
There's a whole row empty here if somebody wants to sit.
They're afraid that might be
Okay, I think we should begin so we know we can begin. Okay, first of all, next week there will not be a class. That's very heartwarming, thank you. I will need therapy this week for validation. I will be in Poland. Next week.
Maybe through Skype. Maybe through Skype.
I'm taking 60, 70 university students, secular students to go to that. We'll talk about it. If I have anything to tell you about it, I'll tell you about it. Next week there will not be a class, and next Shabbos also not. The week after that will be Hanukkah. There will be a class Tuesday Hanukkah in the morning. Be'ezer Hashem bli neder. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming this morning. it's known that translations are always problematic. The reason they're problematic sometimes is because the translator is not skilled and professional, or maybe skilled and professional in one of the languages, but not in both of the languages, or maybe skilled and professional in terms of verbiage, meaning they can technically translate the words, but they don't know how to capture the spirit, the geist, the neshama in the new language. So sometimes you'll read an English translation of something in Hebrew. Technically the translation is correct, but really it's a completely inaccurate translation because nothing of the energy or message is conveyed. But sometimes it has nothing to do with either of the above factors. It has to do simply with the fact that the language which is being used to convey the message lacks the vocabulary, the subtlety, the terminology, and the various usages that exist in the original language. But today I'm going to show you how far and drastic this can be. A person could read a pasuk or a few psukim in Parshas Vayishlach in English, see what it says, go back to the Hebrew, and it seems like it's a very accurate and perfect, or more or less perfect translation. Yet, you will see how inaccurate the translation is, to the point that it's almost alarming. And yet, it's not the translator's fault. They needed to translate it in a way that it would make sense. And if they would really translate what it says in the original, people would look at the English translation and become completely confused. And such an example we're going to see, which will allow us to be able to see how the original text really works in a way that few translations can even begin to capture, which really means that when people read it even in the original, they usually don't realize what is conveyed in the text, in the subtleties of the particular words that are used. Now always, context is always important to be able to understand it. Parshas Vayishlach begins with the story of Yaakov at last returning to his homeland after a long 20 years in exile. We remember the narrative. Yaakov left, he escaped his brother's wrath, and he went to his uncle Lavan, where he meets who would become his future father-in-law, his future wife, his future wife, his future wife, his future wife. Yeah, that didn't claim will come out right, I'm sorry. But accurate. And he will marry, he will try to marry Rachel, he'll marry Leah, he'll marry Rachel, he'll have Bilhah and Zilpah, and ultimately raise a very interesting family, let's put it that way. 12 sons, 1 daughter, and at last he would return home. And as he returns home, and that's where Vayishlach takes over. It's been 20 years he was by Lavan, 20 years in which he worked and worked hard and raised a family. And now it's time to return home. And at this point he sends messengers to his brother. He sends malachim, messengers to his brother, or as Rashi says, malachim mamish. And he basically says, I want to find favor in your eyes. I'm looking for reconciliation. Our relationship has not been peaceful. It's not been the best relationship, to put it mildly. But now I want to share with you what I have done, where I have been, simply to tell you I'm coming back. The messengers come back and they say, we arrived to your brother Eisav, and he's approaching you with 400 men. And they're not waiters to deliver food. Obviously, it's 200 men to fight, and Yaakov is afraid. He's afraid, he's stressed. He does this whole thing, he prepares for war, he splits up his camp into 2. He davens to Hashem, and he also prepares a lavish bribe. In other words, he's doing whatever he can naturally to remove the threat. If need to be, he'll fight. He prays to Hashem to save him, and he also decides to take the path of a large, extravagant gift to send to his brother. The Torah describes how he sleeps there that night by Yolan Sham Balayla Ahu, and he takes and he takes from his assets, from his property, and he prepares a mincha, a gift for his brother Eisav. Torah tells us exactly what the gift looked like, hundreds of animals. And what happens is he gives them to his servants, and he sends them with these gifts to Eisav. And now we read inside, Vayishlach Perek Lamed Beis, Pasuk Yud Ches. I quote, Vayitzaves Harishon Leimer. He commands the first group, because he sends the animals in groups to impress his brother with a larger gift. The first group, he says, Ki Yivgashcha Eisav Achim. As my brother will meet you, Shal Chalemer, he will ask you, Lemi Ata, to whom do you belong? V'ana Seilech, and where do you go? Lemi Eila Lefanecha. And these animals in front of you, whose are they? 3 questions he asks. Who are you? To who do you belong? What is your destination? And what are these things for? You can answer these 3 questions in life, you're pretty good off. V'amarta, you should answer le'avdecha le'Yaakov. Number 1, we belong to Yaakov, your servant Yaakov. Mincha yishlucha la'adoni li'Eisav. Where are we heading and what is this? The last 2 questions, this is a gift, and we're heading to my master Eisav. Mihine gamu acharenu, and he's following us. Vayitzav gam hasheni, gam as hashlishi, gam as kol ha'holchim achre adorim leimer, kadvarvar azet adabna leisu v'tzachem leisu. Same instruction he gives to the second group, to the third group, to everyone following the entire entourage. When you come to Eisav, this is what you should tell him. Amartem, tell him, gam hine avdecha Yaakov acharenu. Your servant Yaakov is behind us. Ki Omar, because he says, and I don't have here an English chumash, but I'm going to give the more or less English translation that you will find the most chumashim, give or take a word as this, a word like this. Ki Omar, he said, Achapra Ponav, I will appease Eisav, Bamincha Eleches Lefane, with the gift that is going before me. V'achrechen Erefonav, then I'll see Eisav's face. Ula Yisapona, maybe he'll atone me. V'ataver Amincha Al Ponav, and the gift passes before Yaakov, who lon balayla hu b'machana, and he sleeps that night in the camp. We know of one more night that he slept in the beginning of the story. Before the gift he slept, and now again that night he slept. When somebody reads this in the English translation, they would not even have a suspicion of something uniquely strange and enigmatic that begs for attention in Pasuk Chav Aleph and Pasuk Chav Beis, chapter 32, verse 21 and 22 in Parshas Vayishlach. Namely, that the word face is mentioned 5 times. 4 times in one Pasuk and 1 in the next. In the English, the context is being translated, not the words. You know why? Because I'm going to now translate it literally, and you will see how it sounds, and you'll understand why no translators go this route if they want to sell their books. So now let me give you the real translation, okay? In English, Yaakov says to them, tell Eisav that your servant Yaakov is behind us. Now listen to the sound. Because he said, let me appease his face through the gift that goes before my face. Then I will see his face. Maybe he will atone my face. And the gift passed before his face. Right? But in the English, they'll never do this. They maybe give you 1 face. From 5, they'll maybe give you 1. They're going to do a chapra panav. Let me appease him. Because face is just a metaphor, you know. Let me appease his face. Let me appease it. With the gift that goes before my face, with the gift that goes before me. And then I'll see his face, okay, that will do. Maybe he will atone me, not my face, he'll atone me. And then the gift passed before his face, it passed before him. But the pasuk clearly uses the word panim 5 times. Achapra panav, I will appease his face with the gift that goes lefonoi, before my panim, my face. And then I will see his face. Maybe he will contain or forgive my face, and the gift pass before his face. It's all about faces. Panim. My face, his face, your face, our face, their face. In this case, it's 2 faces. Now you'll tell me lefanai or lefnei in Hebrew, technically it means face. But we always use it as lefanav, in front of him, right? Before him, in his presence. Say, Vayetze Yaakov milifnei para. Yaakov leads me from the face of para, from the presence of para. The word panim, however, literally means a face. Pnei, right? Pnei is a panim, it's a face. So literally it means face. We translate it and we say the presence before me, but in the Hebrew the Torah makes sure to mention this word 5 times. Now, if you think I'm stretching this a little bit, I'm just being a little dramatic, which any real student knows I'm not. I'm just telling you the facts. Bear with me and let's see the continuation of the story. He goes to sleep. Hulon, he dwells that night, the gift left, and he went to sleep. Vayokam balayla, he wakes up, he arises in the middle of that night. Takes his 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, his 2 maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, and his 11 children. Of course, Binyamin is not born yet. I said before 12, it was only 11. Binyamin would be born later. And they pass what's called the Yabok River, the Jabbok River, which we actually can still geographically identify. If you ever visit Eretz Yisrael in great detail, you can go to a location which is called the Yabok, Nachal Yabok, the river of Yabok. Vayikachem, he takes them all, Vayavirem es hanachal. He passes them over the stream. Vayavir es hasheloy, and he also passes over the stream everything that belongs to him. Remember, he's crossing from the east to the west. He's coming from Mesopotamia, the area of Iraq, of Turkey. He comes to Eretz Yisrael. He crosses the Yabok River. He's now going over to the west towards Eretz Yisrael. What happens next? Chavhei. Vayivaser Yaakov levado. Everyone is on the other side of the river. It's the middle of the night. Yaakov now remains alone because they all left already. He crossed them over, and he's now back on the other side. And a man wrestled with him until dawn break. For the remainder of the night, a man is wrestling with Yaakov. And he sees that he cannot get him. Now, who is he? We have to speculate, it doesn't say. Vayar, there's 2 people. Yaakov is wrestling with somebody. Vayar, and he sees, I'm doing just plain text, that he can't get him. Who can't get whom? We don't know yet, but he can't get him. Vayiga b'kaf yirecha, and he touches his sciatica. So apparently, it's this adversary who touches Yaakov's sciatica, vateka kaf yerech Yaakov b'yavkeim, so that his sciatica, the sciatic nerve, is dislocated in the wrestling. And he says to Yaakov, send me away, because dawn broke. Yaakov says, no way, I will not send you away till you bless me. He says, what is your name? My name is Yaakov. He says, that's your name? No way. That's not a name for you. It's not a name for a nice Jewish boy. Your name is no more Yaakov, your name is Yisrael. Ki sarisa. Sarisa means you have wrestled, or you have prevailed, you have become a sar, like a minister, a prince, with Hashem, with God, and with people, with men, and you prevailed. So now Yaakov says, what's your name? Hagida Nashmecha. Vayomer, and he answers, Lo mazatisha l'shmi. None of your business. Don't ask me for my name. Vayivorich oisei shom, but he does bless him. Now Lamed Aleph. Vayikra Yaakov Shem HaMokem Pnieh. He decides to give this place a name. The name is Pnieh. Why Pnieh? Ki ra'isi Elokim ponim el ponim vatinotzel nafshi. Because I saw Hashem face to face, and my soul was saved. So the face is playing a significant role. To the point that when he has to summarize the whole experience, and he has to choose a name to capture the events of the night, he feels the best name is Peniel, which is Pnei Kael. I saw the face of Kael, the face of Elohim. Vayizrach loy hashemesh kasher avar es Pnuel. And when he passed this place called Pnuel, the sun shines, Leia al Yerechai, and Yaakov is limping, and the last pasuk of this story concludes and says, as a result of that, the Jewish people will not eat this sciatic nerve in the animal Gid Hanasha until this very day because of what occurred to Yaakov. Now, this is the text. If one follows in the Chumash the story, what is the summation of what happens next in the story? The next scene, Yaakov opens his eyes, he lifts up his eyes, and of course he sees his brother Eisav. We know what happened in the beginning of Vayishlach. He was preparing for confrontation, conflict, and bloodshed. He sent this humongous, extravagant bribe to appease his gluttonous brother. He prayed to Hashem. We are now expecting, if we don't know the rest of the story, if we didn't cheat, we're expecting the worst. We don't know how it's going to happen, but we're expecting confrontation. What happens suddenly is, out of the blue, Eisav runs over to Yaakov, and he vayechapkeu, and he embraces him. He falls on his neck, vayishakeu, and he kisses him, and they both weep. This is a moment. 20 years they have been estranged. The estrangement did not happen under very peaceful conditions. Eisav was deeply hurt by Yaakov, but now Eisav hugs him, falls on his neck, kisses him, and they weep. He looks at everything and he asks Yaakov, Mi Elo, who are all these? What are these? He says, these are my children. And then what's this whole gift that you sent? And he says, it's a gift for you. And Eisav says, Yehi loch asher loch. You can keep it, it's yours. But now there's one more pasuk, which I'm going to read to you. Pasuk Yud in the next parak, just to demonstrate the point again. I'm going to read it in Hebrew, and again, often people miss it. Yaakov tells Eisav, Im no matzasi chen beinecha v'lakachta min chasi biyadi. If I find favor in your eyes, take my gift from me. Ki al kein ra'isi fanecha ki ra'ois pnei elokim v'tirtzeni. Because seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. Those are his words. Seeing your face. Ra'isi fanecha is like seeing the face of Hashem v'tirtzeni, and you expressed goodwill to me. Kachna es birchasi asher hu vaslach. Take my blessing that I have brought to you. Take my blessing that I have brought to you, because God has given me chaim, He has graced me with everything, I have everything, and he begs Eisav and he takes. And then they part ways. Eisav doesn't want to part ways. Eisav says, let's go together. Yaakov says, the time is not right for that. I have a big entourage. We got to go slow. If not, they're going to die. Yaakov goes to Sukkos, a place called Sukkos, and Eisav goes to a place called Seir, and their ways part for the remainder of their lives, as far as we know. That is the story. So we have the issue of the faces playing itself out 3 times in the story. Number 1, when Yaakov is preparing the gift and he's saying to himself, this whole 5 times the face, I want to appease his face through the gift before my face, then I'll see his face, he'll forgive my face with the gift before his face, and the gift passes before his face. After the story with the confrontation, he names the place Peniel, because I saw Hashem face to face. When he finally meets Eisav in reality, he's inspired because he says, seeing your face is like seeing Hashem's face. And the obvious question to the serious student is, what's with the faces? Was haben wir with the faces? Why this entire infatuation, or probably the word is this entrenchment in the area of the face? What's the significance of the face? His face, my face. To the point that he says that seeing Eisav's face is like seeing the face of Hashem. Okay, let's put that on hold for a few moments. The story that happens in the middle of the night is one of the more mysterious stories in the whole of Tanakh. It's brief. But it's obvious that there's a lot goes on there, and it's extremely ambiguous. It's hard to understand what happened. But the story is significant uniquely because of two reasons. First of all, it's the story that gives us our name. And any story that gives you your name is a story you always have to understand. Because name is connected to identity. So if there's a story that gives you your identity, you should figure out that story. Maybe not, but it's probably good to figure out that story if you're looking for self-awareness. Remember, this story gave us our name. We are not called Bnei Avraham. We're not called Bnei Yitzchak. We're not called Bnei Yaakov. We are called Bnei Yisrael. Our nation is called Am Yisrael, not Am Yaakov, not Am Yitzchak. Our land is not called Eretz Yaakov or Eretz Avram, even though Avram was the first one promised the land. It's called Eretz Yisrael. Torah is called Torahs Yisrael. A Jew is called Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Torahs Yisrael, not Yaakov. In other words, it's this event that conferred upon us our name to this very day. The name of the Jewish people is in Chumash, in Tanakh, and generally described as Bnei Yisrael, Am Yisrael, children of Yisrael. In Bereshis, it's Bnei Yisrael. In Shmois, it shifts to Am Yisrael. We become a nation, but that's later, not in this book yet. Now we're still a family, a tribe, children of Yisrael. So the name was not given by Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. It was given by this mysterious fellow in the middle of the night. That's number one, which makes the story significant. Number two, it's the only clue we might have of how Eisav had a change of heart. Because we're trying to seek some sequence here, some logic. Yaakov wants reconciliation. Eisav is coming with the intention of war. It's clear. Yaakov is frightened. It says Vayira, Vayetzer. He's frightened. He's stressed. Rashi says he was afraid to die. He was afraid that his family would die. And Rashi also says he was stressed out that he may have to kill somebody else. There's two elements to war. There is the fact that the people who are fighting might be defeated, but even if they're successful, they have a separate fear. The fact that we had to engage in this type of activity is never fun. It's never exciting. It's always, it may be the right thing, but it's the painful thing. It may be the right thing to fight and kill, but it's never geschmack. It's not something you choose. War is not something you choose. So Yaakov is distressed even by the possibility of victory, not by the possibility of defeat, which is a very subtle and interesting idea as well. I think Jews have taken it a little too far, but to the point of self-destruction. But nonetheless, we see that ideally there is a very serious, war is a very serious dilemma, even if you're right, and even if you're going to win. It's not simple. So we're expecting something. What happened in between? The only thing we know is he sent a bribe. But Eisav didn't change his mind because of the bribe. Because Eisav is asking Yaakov, what's all this? Then keep it. So something happened to Eisav. What? He didn't have a dream. He didn't have an epiphany. He didn't have a vision of God. He didn't go to therapy. What did Eisav do in between preparing for war and then seeing his brother and just kissing him and crying at him as though they were the best friends in the world? We're looking for the clue. The missing link is the confrontation in the middle of the night. But the confrontation in the middle of the night doesn't seem to address the conflict between Yaakov and Eisav. It seems to address another theme, but it's put right in between. Yaakov sleeps, sends the gift off, passes his family over. We're now ready for confrontation the next day. That night something happens, and the next day there's peace. This means that this story is the clue, obviously. It's the missing link. That's why it's put right here in the middle of the drama. It interrupts the whole story, even though it's not really relevant directly to the narrative of Yaakov and Eisav, because this is the key of the story, the core of the story. So that's why it's so important to understand the story, besides wanting to understand it. It first of all gives us our name, and second of all, it has the clue for Yaakov and Esav's relationship. So now let's look at the story for a few minutes. The story is, of course, as I said, extremely enigmatic. I'm going to start with a klotz kasha. And I'm now following text itself. Of course, the Mefarshim have lots and lots of commentary on all of this because of the difficulty of the text. But let's analyze the text itself. The text begins and says, Vayivasser Yaakov levada, Yaakov remains alone. Vayeavik ish imay ad aloi sashachar, some of you probably know it from the song. Vayeavik ish imay ad aloi sashachar, a man wrestles with him till daybreak. Now the obvious question is, what does the word levada mean? What does levada in the Tanakh mean? Levada is alone. In fact, we have it in the first parsha. Hashem says, Lo tov hayos ha'adam levada. It's not good for a man to be alone. He needs a wife to disagree with him. Eseloi ezer kenegdoi. I just give literal translations with it. I'm not inventing anything. You don't have to quote it in my name, but I'm giving you the English translation. Eseloi ezer kenegdoi. And I mean, in other words, the next disagreement you have with your husband, don't say Rabbi Jacobson said there's a biblical commandment that I should disagree with you. It's not a biblical commandment, just a biblical fact. Levada means alone. Vayivasser Yaakov levada, Yaakov remains alone. As far as I'm concerned, if I would say that you remained alone in a particular place, it means there's nobody there. Suddenly you tell me a man wrestled with him. So it wasn't levada, so there was somebody there. There was an ish. However you want to define that man, why introduce a scene that is not factual? You could say Yaakov remained without his family, without his support system, without Rachel and Leah, without Bilhah and Zilpah, without Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, the big boys that you wouldn't start up with. And a man wrestled with him. It says levada, he was alone. But if you're alone, there's nobody there. That's number one. Number two, if somebody came especially to attack him and tried to kill him, he just couldn't. So he did the second to the best option, which was hurt him, maim him, wound him, dislocate his sciatica so that he would basically be limping. So that's what happens. He's limping now. Yaakov tells him, it's morning. Leave me alone. Morning is a reason for him to leave him alone. Why? And the man says, the adversary tells Yaakov, morning has come, it's over. The game is over. The fight is over. But why? If I want to get you, okay, so it's morning. And Yaakov says, I will not do it. I want your blessing. I want your blessing. Again, on the surface, a gangster attacks somebody in the middle of a dark alley, tries to kill them, maims them. Now you have them under your grip. Okay. You have them under your grip, and they tell you, leave me alone, and you say, no, I want a bracha. You call 911, you don't ask for a blessing. He wants a blessing. Instead of blessing him, the man says, what is your name? Oh, you mean you don't know who you attacked the whole night? What type of question is this? Oh, you don't know who you came to? Oh, you thought my name was Finkelstein? You thought my name was Yishmael? What's the issue here? Mashmecha? So you mean you just popped out, you saw this guy, and you just pounced on me, you caused me to limp, you first tried to defeat me, you couldn't defeat me, so you dislocated, now you want to know what my name is? And Yaakov says, my name is Yaakov. And he says, oh, let's change your name. If you knew my name, to the point that you want to change my name, you could have just come and said, you want a bracha, let's change your name. First he asks him for his name. When he identifies himself as Yaakov, he says, that's not a good name for you. But 1 second. First you try to kill me, then you maim me. Now I ask you for a blessing, and now you're changing my name. Who asked you to change my name? When Yaakov asks him for his name, instead of being gracious, you tell me your name, I tell you my name, he's like, none of your business. Don't ask me for my name. And he gives him another bracha. And then right after that, Yaakov decides that he saw God face to face, and he was saved, and he names it Pniah. And the next scene, Eisav shows up. And this time, Eisav is a different person. He's kissing him and crying and hugging him and embracing him. And at least at that moment, there is a tender emotion of the natural love that siblings are capable of experiencing before all the complications that often take place as siblings develop and try to find themselves in a big, scary world. So the truth is that the clue to all of this is, of course, the face. That's why the face is so important. What Yaakov is really concerned about is with Eisav's face and his face. And you see it all along. That is why when he sends this gift, what he says is, I want to reach his face. How? Through the gift that goes before my face. Then I could see his face. Then he will forgive my face. So the gifts pass before his face. What Yaakov is saying is, I'm looking for my brother's panim. But the only way my brother's panim, my brother's face can be reached is if I could find my panim, my face. So he goes back and forth, back and forth. And that night something happens. And when he emerges from that night, he says, I saw the face. And now when he meets Eisav, and Eisav hugs him, and Eisav says, I don't need your gift, and Yaakov says, take, kach es birchasi, take my bracha, because seeing your face was like seeing the face of Hashem. Which is why most Mefarshim and Chazal identify that man whom Yaakov wrestled with as somebody to do with what Rashi calls Sarai Shel Eisav, the guardian angel of Eisav, the Malach of Eisav, the prince of Eisav, the source of Eisav, the soul of Eisav, because Yaakov says he saw Hashem face to face, and that's what he would later say to Eisav. So it seems like the two are connected. But what does this really mean? Why that night is he meeting not the physical Eisav, but the Sarah Eisav, the spiritual Eisav, before he's going to actually meet Eisav? And what's the Levada? It's not alone. An angel is a presence. Why is it Levada? And of course, the simplest and deepest explanation, and the simple explanations are always the deepest explanations. Because real depth is primal and simple. It usually defies sophistication. It leaps over sophistication. If I would tell you, and I would ask you to tune in to the following sentence, he or she remained alone, and a man wrestled with them, with he or she, until dawnbreak, but they were alone. This person was alone. It would of course mean that who were they wrestling? Themselves. They were wrestling themselves. If I'm wrestling myself, of course I remained alone. So the man that Yaakov wrestled was Yaakov. Yaakov was wrestling with Yaakov. In other words, remaining alone and wrestling with a man, not only are they not a contradiction, they actually explain each other. Because he was alone, he could wrestle with himself. When you're not alone, you could wrestle with other people. So you could deflect your issues on other people. They're called smoke screens. You have people to blame. You have people to engage. You have people to reflect you or reflect you back to yourself through them, in them. It can get very complicated. It can be a little complicated. It depends on your life story. But when you're alone, not just physically, but when you're alone existentially, levadai in Bereshis doesn't mean like toivei yos adam levadai. It's not good for man to be alone simply to be one man in the physical spatial sense. There should be another person in the house because, he's clueless. He won't be able to live. Levadai, of course, also means existentially alone. Am I alone in the world? What we would call a sense of loneliness. A solitary person. Are you alone in the world? When Yaakov is alone, completely alone, and there's nobody there, now he's not wrestling anybody else. Who is he wrestling? He could finally, at last, it's the good news, you could at last wrestle with whom you have to wrestle. And that's not anybody else. You never have to wrestle with anybody else. Why should you have to wrestle with anybody else? The only reason we wrestle with anybody else is to avoid wrestling with ourselves. Because it's far more comfortable to wrestle with others. than it is to wrestle with yourself. There's a lot there, I think. But, right? Okay. Thank you. But at this point, there's nobody to wrestle with. There's nobody to blame. So, Vayavik Ishi Mayadalos HaShachar. And what happens at the end of this struggle is somebody is limping. The sciatica has been removed. And when Yaakov wants a blessing, he says, first I have to know your name. And when he says his name, he says, we have to change it. So what do we have here? What do we have here? So I'm going to describe now a condition, a story, a reality. And I have to give this as a very important introduction. And that is, when it comes to Yaakov himself, when we speak about Yaakov, Eisav, Avraham, Hagar, Yishmael, Leah, Rachel, any character in Chumash, as I told you, we can always talk about it on two levels. There's the literal person who lived, and there is the conceptual person who lives in your heart, who lives in my heart, who lives in all of our hearts, who lives in our lives. The Ramban writes, HaTorah medaberes betachtonim v'reimezes be'elyonim, meaning any story in Torah can be interpreted on two levels, on a concrete level and as a spiritual idea which lives on. It's not only about the physical story. There was another great commentator, a Kabbalist, he's known as Rabbi Menachem Azaria Fanu from Italy, and he writes the opposite. HaTorah medaberes be'elyonim v'reimezes betachtonim. Meaning the physical story is only a remez. The real story is not even a physical story. The real story is actually a metaphysical story, a spiritual story. It's just using physical symbolisms. So Yaakov ran away is really representing an idea. The Ramban says it's speaking about a physical story and it's alluding to a spiritual story. The Rameh writes it's speaking about a spiritual story and it's alluding to a physical story. When we only take the physical story, we deplete so much of what is going on in the story. So I'm now going to take Yaakov and Eisav as two models that live on in our own lives and apply it to our lives. How it applies to Yaakov and Eisav originally, in Yaakov as one of the three others, it will have to be understood on a much more abstract and a much, I would say, more subtle, much more subtle level. But now I'm going to discuss it not in such a subtle level, I'm going to discuss it at a more concrete level, the way it's applied in terms of people's own internal Yaakov and Eisav. And it's an important disclaimer for various reasons. He asks him for his name. He says, my name is Yaakov. He says, wrong name. We have to change the name. And the words he uses are, he says, Loi Yaakov ye'omer oit shimcha ke'im Yisrael. What's the problem with Yaakov? Well, the reason you were named Yaakov is because Yodoi Oichezes ba'kev Eisav. When Yaakov was born, he was holding on to the heel of his brother. In other words, Yaakov is not even a name that describes him. It's a name that describes his brother. Akev is Akev Eisav. Yaakov was a cute scene. I mean, they took a lot of pictures. You can imagine the scene. This little infant comes out and he's grabbing on to the Akev. I mean, for Rivka, it probably wasn't such a cute scene, but it was a difficult pregnancy. But Yaakov was snapping pictures, and the nurses were screaming Mazel Tov. And not Yaakov, Yitzchak, and went on the how much they weigh, etc. But the concept is they name him Yaakov because he's holding on to Esav's heel. So right when they're born, Rashi already says he's trying to stop him from coming out. He wants to come out first. Yaakov wants to come out first. He wants to be ahead of Eisav, and he's holding on to that heel, so they name him Yaakov. That's scene number one. That's where the name comes from. But now scene number two, the next scene about them is they grow up. Yaakov goes to the tents. He's a wholesome fellow. And Eisav, as we discussed, is a man of the field. He's a skilled hunter. Rivka loves Yaakov. Yitzchak loves Eisav. Eisav feeds him. Kitzayed befiv. He has the strap in his mouth. And then, of course, one day Eisav comes home exhausted, starving. He asks Yaakov for food, a lentil soup, and Yaakov says, no problem, but that birthright I want. That's a replay of the womb. You held on to my heel then, unsuccessfully, and now you actually want to take it. And Eisav sells him the birthright, the b'chayr. And then in the next scene, concerning Yaakov and Eisav, it repeats itself. Yitzchak wants to bless Eisav, and Yaakov dresses up like Eisav and takes the blessings, identifying himself not as Yaakov, but as Eisav. And that's why he ran away, and that's why Eisav despises him. When Eisav tells Yitzchak, when he discovers Yaakov's actions, once again he says, Hachi kara shmo Yaakov. At last I know why you named him Yaakov. Vayakveini ze pa'amayim. Because Yaakov means two things. It means a heel, it also means to outsmart. He outsmarted me twice in this crooked way, as b'chayrasi lakach, as birchasi lakach. He took my b'chayra and my bracha, my birthright and my blessing, and he decides that after Yitzchak passes on, he will finally get rid of Yaakov, who is always taking from him what is so valuable to him. And they leave. They part ways. Yaakov runs. Now after 20 years, Yaakov is coming back. He sends a lavish gift to appease him. But before he meets him, there's somebody else he has to meet. Before you meet your brother, you always have to meet one more person. And that is yourself. And your brother, I mean here, it could be your brother, it could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be God, it could be your husband, it could be anybody. But it's that person with whom you have had to struggle very deeply. That person who you felt always wants to kill you, physically or emotionally. We don't necessarily have a person who wants to kill us physically, but there's a person in whose presence we feel a little more dead emotionally. There's a person that after you get off the phone with them, you may not be able to articulate it to yourself unless you're really self-aware, but you feel a little more dead. You get back to reality because somebody got to run the house and somebody got to, whatever you got to do. But and you're used to it. We get used to deadness. In life, we become used. Somebody once said, most people live lives of quiet desperation. People get used to living a life. Everybody knows what quiet desperation means? Maybe you don't know the words, but probably the concept you understand. Quiet desperation means desperation. You know what desperation is, but it's quiet. We learn to silence it because we don't want to have to deal with it. So there's sometimes a sense of deadness that sets into somebody's heart that you just become used to. And it's almost like, okay, we go there and we come back, and we go there and we come back. Before I could meet that person, I have to be able to meet myself. And that self I will only meet in the middle of the night. I will not meet them in the presence of my wife, in the presence of my children, in the presence of my servants, in the presence of my assets. Because in the presence of those people, I have developed already character. I have developed oomph. I have garnered assets. I have gained reputation and success. It's always the middle of the night, which is always a metaphor to a place of darkness, a place of isolation, a place of aloneness. Nobody sees what's going on. This is not external, this is very internal. Balayla here, Vayavik Ishima Adales HaShachar, is not just physical night versus day. It's symbolic night versus day. And it's always levado because it's very, very internal. And the question that Yaakov has to answer on that fateful night is a very simple, but a very profound question. And that is, will you forever hold on to your brother's heel? Will you forever need his birthright? And will you forever yearn for his blessings? Simply put, you have people who deep down, they never really celebrate their own identity. They'll never forgive God for really creating them. Deep down, they are so lonely because they will never allow themselves to appreciate their own dignity. And there will always be somebody else that they look at who represents for them so much more success, so much more happiness. If I can only have maybe the skills of Eisav, if I could only have the know-how of Eisav, if I could only be loved by my father like Eisav is, if I can only be out there in the field like Eisav, if I could be a skilled hunter like Eisav, if I could grow up as fast as Eisav, and Eisav comes from the word asur, Rashi says, when he was born they said, wow, he's mature, look at this, such a big kid. If I can only have those qualities of conquest, of ambition, of success, of charisma like Eisav, maybe if I could be as emotional as Eisav, have such a relationship with my dad as Eisav, perhaps my life could be more successful and would be successful. So on some level I try vicariously to live my life through my brother, or through other people, or through my society, or through my community, or through whatever they say is the way you have to live, because who I am, I'm the klutz. I'm the loser, I'm the nerd. I will always hold on to your heel to give me guidance and direction, to be able to know how to live my life. And therefore, we have here a metaphor of a condition that exists in many different ways, more subtle, more blunt, more abstract, more tangible, more complicated, less complicated, but the common denominator is always the same common denominator. And that is that I could never really embrace my soul that Hashem has given me fully. I could never really embrace my body that Hashem has given me fully. I may blame it, my Eisav may be sometimes religion. It may be a book, it may be a text, it could be so many different things. But it's always that which I have to be in order to be able to be. Because my being is just not really not good. My primal self is quite evil, or quite nerdy, or quite ugly, or quite horrible. And whatever I have to do to hold on to your heel, I will do. I will take your birthright. I will take your blessing, because I need to be you. On this night, Yaakov wrestles with himself, and he asks himself a very deep question. Can you accept Yaakov? Can you really embrace Yaakov? Can you really be Yaakov? Can you? It's a very deep conflict. And in the morning he will find out that he was limping. What does limping represent? We're not talking about a physical limp. We're talking about a psychological limp. The person limping has all of their limbs and organs and they're functional, but their stature cannot be straight. My stature is compromised. Why? Because the only way I can justify my existence in this world is if I am wounded and maimed. For me to be fully present is a horrible thing. It's horrible. If I could limp, if I could be crushed, now I can justify my existence. I suddenly learn that that's what I have been doing all my life. Physically, I may have been standing up, but emotionally, I have always been limping. And there's always that person who will remind me that if I don't limp, I should not live. They will always remind me that I need to limp. I'm limping. That's what he described, and he emerges. And this man, Yaakov says, don't leave me alone. I know it's morning. The lights are shining. I have to put on my tie and project perfection. I have to come give a shear. It has to be good. Bless me. Bless me. The man says, you don't need a bracha. You need a name change. Tell me your name. That's the key question. Tell me your name. He says, my name is Yaakov. I know that. Of course I know your name, but you have to know your name. Let's change it. You can't be holding onto your brother's heel. You have to realize, Sarisa, you're a sar, you're a prince. Yisrael is letters li roish, my head. Own your head, not your brother's heel. You're not even owning your heel. You're owning your brother's heel. You don't even own your own heel. Own your head. Yisrael is li roish. Sarisa, you have wrestled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. You're a wrestler. You're a wrestler. You weren't born to lose. You were born to fight and to win. Risim Elokim v'manashim. Now Yaakov turns to him and says, what's your name? He says, you don't want to ask that. I am your nameless self. I am yourself before you ever had a name. That's my value. That's who I remain. I remain your nameless self. Vayivarech Eisav Shalom. He blesses him there. And Yaakov says, this day I saw the face of God. What does this mean? The next scene, Eisav meets Yaakov. What does he do? He kisses him. He hugs him. He cries on him. He embraces him. What happened? What happened? What happened was that Yaakov met Yaakov for the first time. Once Yaakov met Yaakov, Eisav can also meet Yaakov. And suddenly he sees a brother, not somebody who's under his skin, in his kishkis, trying to replicate it. He sees a brother. Wow, you're my brother. Brothers love each other. Believe it or not. Sisters love each other. It's just how it is. Or it's how it really is. Is it always that way? Of course not, because they don't know themselves. But brothers love brothers. Primally, sisters love sisters. In fact, there's a relationship between siblings that you can't even have with your spouse or with your children always. I'm not talking here about dysfunctional, abusive families. I'm talking here ideal states where relationships are worked out. Because there's something my sister knows about me that nobody will know. There's a part of you that your brother knows that nobody will know. If you know what I'm talking about. If you have relationships with your siblings, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a certain essence they know, because they know you, how do we say it? You're made out of the same mishagasi. You know what I mean? Your spouse is trying to figure you out your whole life. It's like he's normal, he's not normal, he's kind, he's mishuggah, almost mishuggah, he means well, he's clueless, etc. I mean, good luck at figuring him out. But it's essentially a stranger you're trying to figure out, even though you become close. When you're dealing, and parents is very heavy. Siblings has something very powerful to it, because there's a vulnerability. That's if you trust your siblings, of course. There's a vulnerability. There's like a certain, in the eyes, a sister knows a brother knows a brother knows a sister. In ways they played together, in the same house, killing each other when they were in diapers and even before that. And that's something special. But for that, you have to be able to see your brother. The problem is, it's very hard for us to see our brothers, because we see our brothers as the competitiveness, the energy, who gets more of the mother, who gets more of the father, who's more successful, who married better, who lives in this house, who's more this, who's more that. You don't even know your brother or your sister, because you don't know yourself. You haven't made peace with yourself. So something in your brother or sister triggers a void that you have in yourself. When Yaakov meets Yaakov, Eisav could meet Yaakov. As long as Yaakov doesn't meet Yaakov, Eisav can't meet Yaakov. All Eisav feels is there's somebody who is trying to eat something, to feed off his energy, and it's driving him mad. He doesn't even know how mad it's driving him. So what happens now is Eisav embraces Yaakov with full passion. But it goes one step more than this. And that is, what about Eisav himself? You see, Eisav himself has a face. The word panim comes from the word pnimius. The word panim comes from the word pnimius. And the reason is, because the part of our body that projects mostly our pnimius is always our face. The back is more similar between people. It's hard to identify people from their back unless you really know everything about their physique. But the face is unique. The Gemara says, "Ein partzufei and shavas." No two faces are alike. Even twins, if you grow up with them, no two faces are alike. Every face is unique. And when you look at a person's face, the pasuk says, "Chachmas adam tarir panav." The wisdom of a person is expressed through their panim. And therefore, panim is a face, but it's also the seat of your pnimius. Your internal unique identity somehow shines through your face in one form or another. Some people are more sensitive to it, some people are less sensitive to it. There's a whole chachma called chachmas parts of the chachma of the face. But even without that chachma, just the face has the pnimius of a person more than any other part of the body. And therefore, Yaakov speaks so much here about the face, because as a result of Eisav not knowing Yaakov, Eisav also doesn't know himself. And for Eisav to know himself, Yaakov has to know himself. And for Yaakov to know himself, when Yaakov knows himself, Yaakov could know Eisav. And Eisav could know Eisav. But in order to know Eisav, in order for Eisav to know Eisav, in order for Yaakov to know Eisav, Yaakov knows that he has to be able to see Esav's face, Esav's pnimius. Because the entire problem is that people don't communicate face to face, only back to back. The Arizal talks about four relationships. I'll say them in Hebrew and then translate. Panim bepanim, acher ba'acher, panim ba'acher, acher bepanim. One relationship is back to back, like this. Another relationship is face to back. Another relationship is the other face to the other back. And then there's another relationship called panim bepanim, face to face. It's 4 different types of marriages. Some marriages, they're very connected, but they never see each other. The couple never sees each other. They see only the back of the other one. And the only way they see the back of the other one is through their own back. So they both bring in their backs into the relationship. Then you have face to back, back to face, and then you have face to face. Panim bepanim means my face comes in, and the other person's face comes in. My pnimius comes in. So I'm there with my full presence and my full essence. But for that, I have to be able to know my own panim, and then I could bring it into a relationship, because when my panim comes into a relationship, then I could be fully present without feeding off your energy, because I know my face. And whenever you know your face, not only your back, you can create space for another person's face. But when you don't know your face, you can never create space for another person's face, because you're busy feeding off the other person because you don't know your face, which means your relationship with the other person is only through their back, never through their face. Did you understand what I said?
Yes.
I just want to make sure. I'll be talking to men, I would have to do 2 hours of explanation. So I'm glad you understood. So what happens here is, Yaakov needs to discover Esav's face. Now, Esav's face is not so easy to discover, because we go back to our theme over a few weeks, and that is, Eisav got very bad rap. Nobody looked at his face. Eisav was always looked at from a back perspective. That was Eisav's story. Eisav is this, and Eisav is that, and Eisav is that. By 9 years old, he was thrown out of every conceivable yeshiva in New York. By the age of 15, he has been to 29 yeshivas. Eisav is the ultimate one who is rejected. Yitzchak loves Eisav. But the truth is, Eisav has a different path. But Eisav is essentially not evil. He struggles. But for this, you have to be able to see Eisav's face. So I said this morning a story that the Baal Shem Tov was once asked by a mother to pray for her child who was ill. And he prayed, and to no avail. And she came desperately pleading with him that he prays. And the Baal Shem Tov asked his Gabbai to go to the city and gather all the Shtad Ganovim. Every self-respecting Jewish city had a group of thieves. They still have it in many Jewish cities, where people steal in order to support their family. And it was considered a very dignified way of supporting your family. In some places, it's still considered a very dignified way of making parnasa. And this was a group, it's called Shtad Ganovim. And the Baal Shem Tov summoned them. They all had respect for the Baal Shem Tov, so they came, and he says, Chevre, let's daven for this child. And they daven. And the boy recovered, and the Talmidim, the student Baal Shem Tov came and said, Rebbe, we don't understand. You have here Talmidim, you have a group called Chevraya Kadisha, a holy group, giants, people who were giants. Giants in Torah, giants in Avodah, the thieves. The Baal Shem Tov said something which superficial people think is anecdotal, but is profoundly deep and subtle. The Baal Shem Tov said as follows: I saw that the gates of heaven were locked, and there was a lock on the gates that could not be opened up by any of my prayers. So I had to summon people who know how to break locks. That's why I summoned them. What was the Baal Shem Tov saying? The rebellious child who becomes the thief, you could look at him on two levels. You could look at him from the back, from the Achirayim, meaning you don't see him for what he is. You see him the way he's projected and perceived by you, which is the difference of face and back. A back means I see you from my perspective and I define you from my perspective. I reduce you to the box that I'm capable of forming. Many relationships are back to back. I reduce you to my imagination, you reduce me to your imagination, and now we're supposed to connect. Imagine? The husband sees the wife completely from his perspective. She sees him completely from her perspective. They're not even seeing the same person. He's talking to her, he's talking to one person. She's talking to herself, she's talking to another person. She's talking to him, she's talking to a third person. When they're talking to each other, there's four people talking to four different people. That's what's really happening. Why? Because Acharayim means I see you from my imagination, I put you in my box, and that's what we do with people. You see a person, you meet a person, you define them based on terminology you know. Maybe some people are extremely, they have a depth that you don't even know about. But for that, I have to acknowledge that there are things I know, there are things I don't know, there are things that I don't know, but I know that I don't know. There are things that I don't know, but I don't know that I don't know. And that's 99% of reality. So how many people understand that most of reality they don't know that they don't know? You don't have to all raise your hands at once. But till I acknowledge that, I can't see anybody's face because I'm busy knowing. Faces begin in not knowing, always. Because then my box can expand. So Eisav, I could look at this kid who's a thief and say, a ganav, a gazlan, a shrek, a terror. Why? Doesn't work out. And his behavior may be horrible, reprehensible. What the Baal Shem Tov was saying is you don't understand. They know how to break locks. If you'll teach them how to break locks in heaven, that's what they'll do. If not, they'll break other locks. They have a spirit. They're revolutionaries. What are you going to revolt against? If the sky is not the limit, if you channel their revolutionary powers to change the world, they'll change the world. If not, they'll break pathetic locks. And that's where the outlet for the energy will be. That's why the Gemara says, Al tigoi b'mashiach. The pasuk says, don't touch my Mashiach. So what does the Gemara say, you know? Elu tinoikas shel beis Rabbi. These are the children. What does it mean? It means a child, in his or her own imagination, is a little Mashiach, every child. Think when you were a child, you dreamt. And in your imagination, you own the world. But as we grow up, somebody kills the Mashiach in us. Somebody says, stop being an idiot. You're a klutz. Just get 70 on your next test. That's the goal. And that's it. And if you could just walk through and not make any waves and nobody should notice you, so we could hatch you, match you, dispatch you, and just create a new generation, you're good to go. Don't destroy the child in people, because that's the anointed one. Mashiach means anointed. That's the voice in you that says, I could create redemption. I can create redemption. But so many voices say, just be quiet, make challah. Now, I don't mean make challah is a good thing. Make challah is a good thing. But what I'm talking about is, if you have a voice in you, sometimes it's repressed. It says, just do what your neighbor does. So what happens here is, Eisav's face is often, nobody even knows about it. Who knows about Eisav's pneumius? The head of Eisav is buried where? In the bosom of Yitzchak. It says you're not supposed to bury a tzaddik by a Rasha. But the head of Eisav is not wicked. The head of Eisav is actually holy. The panim of Eisav is very holy. So now Yaakov went through a whole process. And in order to discover this process, he has to go far away. And when he goes far away, Rivka tells him something, and this is something that is often ignored. When Rivka sends him away from the house, she says, run away and stay by my uncle for a few years, until the wrath of your brother relaxes, until the wrath of your brother goes away from you. You hear? Now nobody translates this. Goes away from you. Eisav is angry at you, but you know why he's angry at you? You don't know Eisav. You're angry at him. You never accepted Eisav. He says, until the wrath of your brother goes away. You got it. He said, she was just saying it again. No. The wrath of your brother got to go away from you. From you, Yaakov. And who is this? This is Rivka. Rivka who loved Yaakov. Rivka who did this whole Monsey with the brachas. The wrath of your brother has to go away from you, and that's why I'm sending you away. I'm not sending Eisav away. Eisav has to stay with his father, as discussed. When he goes to Lavan, he wants to marry Rachel. That's his wife. That's the familiar woman. That's the familiar self. But suddenly he discovers Leah, which is the unfamiliar spouse. The spouse that doesn't suit my imagination like a hand in a glove. The spouse that challenges me very deeply. The spouse that tells me you really got to find out who you are and expand your horizons ad infinitum. After that whole process, he now comes back and he sends messengers to Eisav. Eisav is going to war. He wants to kill his brother. 20 years later, he wants to kill him. So Yaakov prepares a gift, and Yaakov focuses only on one thing, the face. Achapra panav. I want to appease his face with the gift that will go before my face. Then I'll be able to see his face. I want to see my brother's face. I don't want to forever look at my brother and never see him. Only see him as my enemy, as my void, as my relationship, as how I protect myself, how I impress him, how I run from him, how I crush him, how I envy him, how I get him, how I don't get him, how I avoid him. For once, I don't want to do anything. I just want to see your face. I don't have to be in the relationship. I don't have to be something because I could see your face, just you. It's not you the way I'm busy defining you, manipulating you, figuring you out, turning you into this, into that. Why does she have to be this? Why does he... Whoa. They are they. Just relax. But the mind can't accept faces. I turn you into something else. My back. I want to see Eisav's face. And if I see his face, you know what will happen? He will accept my face. So the gift passes before his face. That night, he wakes up and he wrestles himself. And he learns about his face. So when Chazal say he was fighting Eisav's guardian angel, that's exactly what it means. He was fighting the Eisav in him. Who am I? Am I Yaakov? Am I Eisav? If I want to be Eisav, I can't see Eisav for who he is because I'm busy turning him into me and turning myself into him because I don't know who I am. So I don't even know who Eisav is. So at the end of this confrontation, the guy says, your name gotta go. Yaakov has to go to Yisrael. Done. Stop calling yourself Yaakov. It's not a name issue, it's an identity issue. So he says, I saw God face to face and my soul survived. Why don't we want to see our faces? We're afraid we're going to die. Because we don't understand that our face is God's face. The neshama is a chelik elikam mimal. My face is a klutz. My identity is blah. It's either it's evil or it's just a loser of losers. It's the face of God. So you're running away from God's face. So it's funny, we look to God to run away from God. People run to God to run away from God. That's tragic. Because your face is a connection to Pnei Elokim. So where are you running to? So it's like God sends you right back. You'll find me with you. He says, I survived. Wow. Vayizrach lo hashemesh, and the sun shines. And we never eat from the Gid Hanasha till that day. We don't want to limp. When Eisav experiences this, suddenly Eisav sees Yaakov. Wow, what a cute brother. What a cute, interesting brother. I promise you, your brother has a very interesting personality. We just don't have the mental space to give it to him. We can't afford it. I'm too busy surviving. I'm now going to analyze my brother. Somebody says, your brother. Oh, and what about me? Your sister, what about me? Your mother, your brother. And what about me? Subconsciously, it's like, and where am I in the picture? And how much am I accepting? How much am I not accepting? And it's taken away. You don't even know your brother. You don't know your sister. You don't know your mother. You don't know your father. Sometimes you don't know your children. It's all because you don't know yourself. If I don't know myself, I can't know anybody in the world because I'm busy turning everybody into the image I need to turn them into, so I should be able to survive and thrive. And it's called a back-to-back relationship. The challenge is when it's back to face to back, good luck. You have to be very healthy then. Face to face is like, whoa. So now, when Eisav meets Yaakov, he's like, wow, what an interesting brother I have. So cute. All these, look at your family. He's like, Eisav is like loving it. You would think Eisav should get jealous. Look at this guy, success, prosperity. You know what Yaakov had there? In fact, right there at the end of the 8th, it says, Vayihi ha'Ish. Yaakov is called the Ish who was extremely successful. The same Ish, he was fighting that Ish. That's how we know Ish is Yaakov. Eisav should get it, he's not jealous. He's like, this is beautiful. So Yaakov tells him, not only take my gift, you know what Yaakov tells him? Kach birchosi. Kach birchosi. Suddenly he changes from mincha to bracha. Kach naz birchosi, the Sepharno says, take the bracha. At this moment, you could take your bracha. That's what happens. Why? Because I saw your face. And it looks like God's face. He tells his brother, I saw your face and it looks like God's face. Last night I saw my face and it looked like God's face. Today I saw your face and it looked like God's face. When you could see in your face God's face, you could see in your brother's face God's face. Al kein ra'isi fanecha ki ra'is pnei Elokim. Why is this our name? Because one of the greatest struggles of the Jewish people over thousands of years was this struggle. Identity. Jews for thousands of years have often felt that if we can only be like Eisav, Eisav will stop hating Yaakov. If we can only look like Eisav, dress like Eisav, feel like Eisav, integrate with Eisav, marry with Eisav, hang out with Eisav, drink with Eisav, golf with Eisav, just be Eisav. Get rid of all the Jewish stuff. From the nose to the religion. Everything. Everything. Things will be good. And Jews tried it, and they tried it, and sometimes it seemed successful, but it always came back to bite them. That 2,000 years of history. Why? Because this is the interesting paradox. Eisav knows that Yaakov is not Eisav. The more Yaakov compares himself to Eisav, the more Eisav feels threatened by Yaakov and suspicious about Yaakov. If there will ever be a day that Eisav can really hug Yaakov, embrace Yaakov, cry with Yaakov, and love Yaakov, it's when Yaakov can embrace Yaakov, when Yaakov could love Yaakov, when Yaakov could hug Yaakov. If there's ever be a day that the world will love Israel, the world will love the Jewish people, it's when the Jewish people can really love the Jewish people. Have a wonderful day.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.